a little bit now is just one of our last couple ones here. We're talking a little bit about just things that in physiology that influences you in like a microgravity situation and some of the interesting stuff that we have issues with in space. I always think this is kind of a fun one to do. There's been talk a lot of times. I actually just watched another show about going to Mars. Kind of getting into this idea of what are some of the physiology things that we'd have to overcome and what could be some of the issues with long-term stays in space. Obviously, I think most people know this is the 1960s when people started going up to space, and in reality, it's not been a big group of people that have been up there. We'll see if it ever gets to where it is a common thing to be going up there, but that being said, we have to solve a number of different things physiology-wise before people can be doing a decent amount of time up in space. Like it says here, when gravity goes away, gravity is one of these things that plays a big role in how our muscles develop, how our bones develop, our proprioceptive senses are all involved in this. We are born and have evolved in a gravitational field, and when that is removed, there is going to be some issues with physiology that are going to be definitely a bit different when it's not there. And again, it's not truly weightlessness. It's just that you're moving just as fast as when you're in orbit. You're microgravity. One of the things that can happen, you can definitely get motion sickness, disoriented. We're going to see different changes in blood flow and again in muscles as well as bones. So what we'll do, a few things here, is this thing will kind of take you back and forth to a lot of these things here. So first thing we'll do is let's just talk a little bit about motion sickness. Space motion sickness is definitely a real thing. Our vestibular senses rely on gravity, and if you've had A&P, we've talked about this. Your static equilibrium with the hair cells in the vestibule, the saccule and the utricle. And you have these hair cells with the kinocilium and the stereocilia, and how they get bent towards or away from that cilia is going to play a role on your head position. When you get into space, one of the things that's going to happen is when you move your head side to side, there is no gravity that is going to be really pulling on these things in the air. So your eyes can tell you what's up and down, but your vestibular senses really, without that gravity, don't have the ability to tell you, is your head moving forward, is your head leaning backwards? So you can get a lot of these conflicting signals. And one of the things that most people have issues with in space when they first go up there is motion sickness. Very bad motion sickness, actually. And it's, again, some of these disconnects here. Again, if you close your eyes, you can tell which way is up, but in gravity-free, or at least microgravity type of thing here, your vestibular sense is not going to be able to tell you that you're upside down or right side up. And it also, without that pull of gravity on your arm, sometimes you can kind of feel like you're disembodied a little bit. Gets confused about where things are at. You can be vomiting. Like I said, most astronauts at some level, I think it says there's 60 to 70, the vast majority are going to have issues with this. One of the things that's interesting, your brain does adapt to this. After being in this thing here, we start relying more on visual inputs and less on our proprioceptive senses. One of the things I have talked about in class already is the fact that that static equilibrium generally gets triggered when you tilt your head forward to the side. In space, the only thing that's going to trigger that is actually linear acceleration. So if you push off of something, you're moving towards something or away from something or side to side. Your body will get very used to that being the only thing. One of the things that can be an issue with is when you get back in a gravitational field, you are going to get the sensation that you've been shoved forward or shoved to the side because your body has adapted, or in reality, physiologically adapted to that being the stimulus that sends that. So your perception is going to be that until your body has a chance to readapt to these gravitational surroundings. Like I said, there is nothing pulling on there, so it's very easy to feel like your arms and legs are not particularly connected because they have no weight. A lot of those proprioceptive things in your arms rely on gravity to say where they're at, and there's been stories from different astronauts that fell asleep and woke up and they see something floating in front of them and don't realize it's actually their arm because they don't really have any idea of where that arm position was at. The other thing is a lot of times you feel a little bit abnormal in that our bodies are built to be in a gravitational field. So a lot of our organs are held in place from the top, so these organs hang down and stay in place. Microgravity, these organs can shift around, and this is one of the other things that can lead to some of that nauseousness in a lot of this. So again, sick and vomit, but usually it's only for a few days. One of the ways they do this is that little vomit comment to get people ready for this. Again, generally after a little period of time, this will go away. But it is something to pay attention to when you're going to be doing space travel. So the next thing we can kind of talk about here is going to be a little bit about the circulatory system and some of the stuff that becomes an issue with that. Generally, on the ground, we have gravity pulling on our blood. Because of this, our fluids have a tendency to pull on our legs, and we are kind of built to try to make sure that fluid comes back. When you go into space, one of the things you're going to see is you don't have that. So what ends up happening, you get this large fluid shift, which is going to put some stress on the heart, does some stress on some other things. The body is going to deal with this by activating the kidneys a little bit more and increasing urination. But initially in space flight, you're going to get a lot of fluid traveling up to the upper body, the core, the arms, the face. And after you adapt a little bit, it's going to get back to normal. That being said, when you get back on Earth right away, you can also have some issues again with this one because your body's now got used to not having to, deal with the pull of gravity. So a lot of times you can have some of these issues with standing up and passing out type of thing until your body gets used to gravity again a little bit here. But initially, you're going to get your sinuses filling with fluid. A lot of times people have a headache because there's a lot more fluid there. It's kind of that feeling you get when you're upside down on Earth where you have all the fluid rest your head. So if you were to stand on your head, that kind of feeling you get of that pressure, it's going to be like that in space, but when you're upright. This fluid in these areas is going to activate the kidneys to really start cooling out in terms of any keeping water in the body. So what the kidneys are going to start doing is really starting to filter out more of this excess fluid that is now coming up to the body volume here. The main volume of the body, the head and neck and thoracic region. You're not going to feel thirsty. You're going to decrease your fluid intake. Your urine output is going to increase. And you can lose about a quarter of your blood volume compensating for this. Again, this is why when you get back on Earth, it can be a little bit of an issue to start with, where you can have some of those issues without being able to stand up, go from like leaning over to standing up without passing out. It does take a little while for your body to get used to it again. Again, as you're eliminating fluids, you're also going to kind of tone down the blood cells, so your blood isn't going to get in too thick. One of the issues that astronauts have is anemia. Within about 4 days of space flight, you're going to have a decrease in red blood cells in the blood. So you can definitely have anemia issues as you are spending longer times in space. Like it says here, it's about 15% decrease in red blood cells after about a 3-month stay in space. Again, it will return to normal after time back on the ground, but it's going to take a little while. It's going to take a month or so here. White blood cells are also slightly reduced. Can become a problem if there was an infectious type of thing on a long-term space flight. But generally, what's going on there, you're not exposed, obviously, in space and on the space station to a lot of people. You're not bringing a lot of new people in there. So the likelihood of picking up some type of infectious agent, especially since people quarantine generally before they go up into space and are checked for everything, is not likely. Again, if this was a much more tourist thing and things like that, this would be something else to worry about, though. All this is going to affect the heart, too. You don't have as much blood volume. Your heart is not going to be pumping as hard, and it takes less energy to move around. Your heart does not have to be as active. There is less resistance to work against gravity. All these things mean the heart does not have to work as hard. So over time, you are going to have a reduction in the size of the heart. And again, this is just going to be because everything, like we've said a lot of times with stuff, it's use it or lose it. or when you need to, your body's going to adapt to the stressors that are being put on it. When there is not a stressor, there's definitely going to be a reduction in heart size, as the body is not needing to work as hard to do activities, also to move blood or fluids around. One of the ways that they kind of deal with some of this stuff here is they do have some what are called lower body negative pressure kind of suits. Kind of sets a vacuum, so it's going to pull some fluids down to your legs. And astronauts will do this in order to try to keep their circulatory system in closer to Earth conditions, so when they do get back down to Earth, that they're not going to have issues with like that orthostatic kind of passing out type of thing. Like I said, when you get back to Earth, it's going to pull away, and like I said, you can have issues with trying to maintain consciousness. It takes a little while for you to up your fluid intake, get those blood levels back to normal. The anemia is going to take a little while to go away. So a lot of this, when you first get back, it's going to be a lot of taking it easy and making sure you don't pass out. One other thing, not something you think about too much, but menstruation is aided by gravity. This is also something that can be affected by space. Generally, gravity is going to assist in the shedding of that uterine lining out of the vagina, and in microgravity, this is not there, so there can be some issues with this in terms of these fluids staying within the body and not working their way out. So if we kind of go back here now, we can also take a look at the muscles. Again, as I've said, it's kind of use or lose it. It's going to be a similar thing with the bones. In microgravity, you're going to have atrophy. The longer you're there, the worse it's going to get. Generally, if you're in space, it does not take as much power to move your body. Doesn't take as much power to stand up, to do other things. We tend to see muscles that are here, you're losing about 5% a week in terms of postural muscles and muscle strength. Again, you have to increase the load on them to do this. So one of the things, I mean, even if you're bedridden on Earth, you're going to lose muscle. If you have a cast on or something else like that, you're going to lose muscle. So one of the things we see with space is they will try to work out and come up with ways to use these muscles in order to try to maintain some of that muscle capacity. Again, it's going to be difficult to do enough work to maintain that. Generally, for the amount of times that people up there, that's one thing. But if you're talking a trip to Mars, which is going to take somewhere on the order of 6 to 9 months, depending on where it's at, spending some time there, and then a similar trip back, you're looking at 3 years, where the closest you're going to get to Earth's gravity is about 60% when you get to Mars. So again, this could be some of the issues that you would see. There is ways in terms of spaceship design that they could have some rotating things that would simulate some gravity with centrifugal force. But again, those are not the type of things that have been really built yet that we can do. So again, it's something to think about if humans ever start talking about trying to go to Mars. This is one of those things you have to think about, is maintaining that muscle mass, and when they actually get to Mars, that they're able to stand up after spending 9 months in a microgravity type of environment. So again, those muscles that help you stand up, the postural muscles, slow twitch versus fast twitch, over a long period of time, 20% of the slow twitch fibers are going to kind of disappear and become fast twitch fibers over time. Again, the longer you stay up there, the worse this will get. 11 days of microgravity, muscle fibers can shrink by about 30%. So the longer you're up there, the more of an issue this could end up being when you return to a gravitational field such as on Mars or on Earth. Again, once you get back in these areas, you can recover rather quickly as long as you're not been up there too long. But years-long missions, this is where there could be issues. Again, International Space Station, they do a lot of these workouts to try to figure this out. That's been some of the ideas behind having something up there, is to test some of these things. So if humans ever do try to go to Mars, that there is going to be some ability to deal with this. So they have things like treadmills that they strap you down on, rowing machines, bicycles, things that you're strapped into. Again, it has to be something you're kind of strapped into, because equal and opposite reaction, physics works really well in space. So you can't just be doing lifting or pushing on something, because it's also going to move you around. So these are ways that we can deal with this to strengthen this by doing types of workouts in space. The last thing I want to kind of talk about on this first one here is something to worry about is bones. Again, on Earth, your body weight is being supported by your bones. And it's those osteoblasts and osteoclasts that are doing all this bone remodeling to make sure you have the bone density necessary to hold this up. In space, you're going to get over time, again, a loss of bone mass. Like it says here, about 1 to 2% per month. Tends to affect the vertebrae and leg bones the most, because they're doing the most weight support most of the time. But again, if you're not putting the stressor on them, the body does not try to maintain it at the same levels. So again, your microgravity, you're not doing weight bearing. Your hips, your legs, your backbone, none of these are really doing that. And one of the things I've talked about is time up in space, you get taller. It's not that you actually truly get taller, it's just that nothing is compressed as much. Stuff is at a time to kind of stretch out. There's not that compression due to gravity, which means when you get back on the ground, over time you will lose that height that you gained. But initially you're going to be a little bit taller when you get back from space, after like Mark Kelly did, for example, on the space station for 6 months. Again, the mass of the bones is going to decrease the longer you stay up there. So 10 days of microgravity, bone loss of about 3%. Again, depending on how long you're up there, we don't know exactly how much of this is recoverable, especially after a much longer duration space flight. Again, one of those things that we have to worry about if we were going to try to go to Mars. That idea that you're going to be 6 to 9 months at least in a microgravity type of situation, where you're having your bones not getting a stressor, and then you're going to go and step on a planet with 60% of the gravity of Earth. You just these are things we have to work out. The other thing is like I said, your blood's calcium levels tend to go up because you're not maintaining this bone, which means you're releasing calcium. So the likelihood of forming kidney stones does tend to go up as well. Osteoporosis definitely could become an issue after space travel, is another thing here. Again, it happens on Earth just due to hormonal differences. Definitely could be an issue as we start talking about spending long term in space. So I think that's what I would do for this first one here. We're going to come back on the second one here and talk about the bottom half of this here. And that'll be our last one. So I will see you next time.